15,000 feet beneath the Atlantic Ocean, a deep-sea camera pushed through the twisted corridors of a graveyard.
15,000 feet beneath the Atlantic Ocean, a deep-sea camera pushed through the twisted corridors of a graveyard. Bismarck, Hitler's most powerful warship, had rested here in silence for nearly 80 years. But when explorers finally breached the Admiral Suite in 2019, their cameras captured something that contradicted every official account of the ship's final moments. Documents perfectly preserved in the crushing darkness told a story that both Germany and Britain had spent decades trying to bury. What they found proves one of World War II's greatest cover-ups. The pride of the Kriegsmarine. The Bismarck wasn't just a battleship, she was a statement. When she slid down the slipways at Blohmen and Voss in Hamburg on February 14, 1939, 50,000 people gathered to witness the launch of what would become the most feared warship in the Atlantic. At 41,000 tons fully loaded, stretching over 800 feet from bow to stern, she represented everything the Third Reich wanted the world to believe about German engineering and military might. Her construction had taken nearly 3 years. 8 15-inch guns sat in 4 massive turrets capable of hurling shells weighing nearly a ton over 20 miles with devastating accuracy. Her armor belt measured nearly 13 inches thick in places, designed to withstand punishment from any gun afloat. 12 high-pressure boilers fed 3 turbine sets, giving her a top speed of 30 knots. But more than her specifications, the Bismarck carried something else. Something intangible. She carried Germany's pride, and perhaps more dangerously, Hitler's obsession. Admiral Gunther Lütjens commanded her. A career naval officer, Lütjens was 52 years old when he raised his flag aboard the Bismarck in May 1941. Tall, austere, with a reputation for tactical brilliance and personal courage. He understood what his ship represented. He also understood the mission ahead would either cement the Kriegsmarine's dominance over the Atlantic or end in catastrophe. There would be no middle ground. The British knew the Bismarck was coming. Intelligence reports had tracked her working up in the Baltic. Reconnaissance flights photographed her in Norwegian fjords. But knowing she existed and stopping her were 2 entirely different problems. The Royal Navy had ruled the waves for centuries, but now they faced a vessel that challenged that supremacy at its core. What nobody knew then, what would not be discovered until cameras reached the ocean floor decades later, was that both sides would have reasons to lie about what happened next. Operation Rheinobong, Exercise Rhine, began on May 18, 1941. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential. The Bismarck, accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, would break out into the North Atlantic and wreak havoc on the convoy routes that kept Britain alive. Every week, dozens of merchant ships crossed from America, carrying food, fuel, weapons, and raw materials. Sever that lifeline, and Britain would starve. Churchill knew it, Hitler knew it, and Lucianus knew it. The 2 ships left Gotenhofen, modern-day Gdynia, in Poland, under cover of darkness. They sailed north along the Norwegian coast, refueling in Bergen, before making their dash through the gap between Iceland and Greenland. British intelligence spotted them, but the Denmark Strait was wide, the weather was terrible, and the Germans were fast. If they could slip through, they would disappear into the vast Atlantic hunting grounds. May 23, 1941. The heavy cruisers HMS Norfolk and HMS Suffolk picked up the German ships on radar in the Denmark Strait. The weather was exactly what Lütjens had hoped for: snow squalls and mist, visibility dropping to less than a mile. But the British had something the Germans did not fully appreciate yet: effective surface search radar. Suffolk's Type 279 radar painted the Bismarck at 13 miles, and the cruisers began to shadow, staying just out of range, reporting the German position every few minutes. Admiral John Tovey, commanding the British home fleet from HMS King George V, began moving his pieces across the board. The battlecruiser HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, and the new battleship HMS Prince of Wales raced to intercept. They had one chance.
If the Bismarck made it past them into the open Atlantic, finding her again would be nearly impossible. The stage was set for one of naval warfare's most famous engagements. But what happened in the Admiral Suite during those crucial hours? The decisions made and the orders given would not match the official German records. The discrepancies were small at first, times that did not quite align, reports that contradicted each other. Nothing obvious enough to raise questions while the war still raged. But the documents preserved in the freezing darkness of the ocean floor would tell a different story, one that suggested Lutyens knew something, perhaps even suspected something that made him question his own chain of command. The Hunt. Dawn, May 24, 1941. The Hood and Prince of Wales closed from the south, while the Bismarck and Prince Eugen steamed southwest through the Denmark Strait. At 5:52 a.m., the British ships opened fire from nearly 13 miles away. The Hood, veteran of 22 years of service, the largest warship in the world when she was built, the Bismarck and Prince Eugen steamed southwest through the Denmark Strait. At 5:52 a.m., the British ships opened fire from nearly 13 miles away. The Hood, veteran of 22 years of service, the largest warship in the world when she was built, led the charge. She was magnificent, deadly, and fatally flawed. The Germans returned fire at 5:55 a.m. The Bismarck's third or fourth salvo, historians still debate which, struck home. The shell, weighing nearly 2,000 pounds, plunged down through the Hood's lightly armored deck and detonated in or near one of her magazines. The explosion was catastrophic. A massive fireball erupted from the Hood's center. Her back broke, and she sank in less than 3 minutes. 1,415 men died. 3 survived. The Prince of Wales fought on, but she was brand new, her guns still giving trouble, her crew still learning their ship. She scored several hits on the Bismarck, including one that ruptured fuel tanks and contaminated others with seawater, before breaking off under heavy fire. The Germans had won, but they were wounded. The Bismarck was trailing oil, her speed slightly reduced, and the entire British Navy was now hunting her with singular purpose. Lutyens made his decision. The Prince Eugen would continue the commerce raiding mission. The Bismarck would make for occupied France, specifically the port of Saint-Nazaire, for repairs. It was a reasonable call, perhaps the only call, but it meant traversing nearly 2,000 miles of ocean with the enemy closing from multiple directions. For the next 2 days, the British hunted. Torpedo bombers from HMS Victorious attacked on the night of May 24th, scoring 1 hit that did little damage. The Bismarck surface search radar painted the Bismarck at 13 miles, and the cruisers began to shadow, staying just out of range, reporting the German position every few minutes. Admiral John Tovey, commanding the British home fleet from HMS King George V, began moving his pieces across the board. The battlecruiser HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, and the new battleship HMS Prince of Wales raced to intercept. They had one chance. If the Bismarck made it past them into the open Atlantic, finding her again would be nearly impossible. The stage was set for one of naval warfare's most famous engagements. But what happened in the Admiral Suite during those crucial hours? The decisions made and the orders given would not match the official German records. The discrepancies were small at first, times that did not quite align, reports that contradicted each other. Nothing obvious enough to raise questions while the war still raged. But the documents preserved in the freezing darkness of the ocean floor would tell a different story, one that suggested Lutyens knew something, perhaps even suspected something, that made him question his own chain of command. The Hunt. Dawn, May 24, 1941. The Hood and Prince of Wales closed from the south, while the Bismarck and Prince Eugen steamed southwest through the Denmark Strait. At 5:52 a.m., the British ships opened fire from nearly 13 miles away. The Hood, veteran of 22 years of service, the largest warship in the world when she was built, led the charge. She was magnificent, deadly, and fatally flawed. The Germans returned fire at 5:55 a.m. The Bismarck's third or fourth salvo, Historians still debate which struck home. The shell, weighing nearly 2,000 pounds, plunged down through the hood's lightly armored deck and detonated in or near one of her magazines. The explosion was catastrophic. A massive fireball erupted from the hood's center. Her back broke, and she sank in less than 3 minutes. 1,415 men died. 3 survived. The Prince of Wales fought on, but she was brand new, her guns still giving trouble, her crew still learning their ship. She scored several hits on the Bismarck, including one that ruptured fuel tanks and contaminated others with seawater before breaking off under heavy fire. The Germans had won, but they were wounded. The Bismarck was trailing oil, her speed slightly reduced, and the entire British Navy was now hunting her with singular purpose. Lutyens made his decision. The Prince Eugen would continue the commerce raiding mission. The Bismarck would make for occupied France.
The Germans, based on survivor testimony, claimed the crew scuttled her, opening seacocks and detonating charges to prevent capture. Both sides had reasons to shape the narrative. The British needed a clear victory. The Germans needed to preserve the honor of their lost ship and crew. The truth, lying in the Admiral Suite's preserved documents, would be more complex and far more controversial. Buried secrets. For 48 years, the truth rested 15,000 feet below the Atlantic surface. The exact location of the wreck was unknown. Survivors gave rough positions, but the ocean is vast and the margin for error enormous. Depth, currents, visibility, all made finding the Bismarck nearly impossible with mid-20th century technology. The official narrative hardened into accepted history. The British sank the Bismarck, or the Germans scuttled her. Take your pick, depending on which country you asked. Both versions painted the story in simple, heroic terms. The British had avenged the Hood. The Germans had denied the enemy his prize. Everyone was satisfied with their version of events. But questions lingered among serious naval historians. Survivor accounts did not quite match the British damage reports. The timeline of the sinking had odd gaps. Some German officers, interviewed decades later, spoke carefully, choosing their words with a precision that suggested they knew more than they were saying. Why had Lutyens sent that long radio transmission when he knew the British could track it? Why had the Bismarck's final maneuvering been so uncharacteristic of Lindemann's earlier brilliant ship handling? Small details, easily dismissed, but persistent. The Cold War kept deeper questions buried. Germany was divided. Records were scattered or destroyed, and nobody wanted to reopen wartime controversies when both sides needed to focus on the Soviet threat. Veterans aged, memories faded or became unreliable, and the Bismarck became legend rather than history, a story told and retold until the details mattered less than the mythology. The ocean kept its secrets. 3 miles down, beyond the reach of conventional diving, the Bismarck rested on an underwater mountain slope in the deep Atlantic. Pressure at that depth reaches 6,000 pounds per square inch. It is perpetually dark, near freezing, and until recently completely inaccessible to human exploration. But technology advances, and with it comes the possibility of finally answering questions that official records left deliberately vague. Robert Ballard was already famous when he went looking for the Bismarck. 4 years earlier, in 1985, he had found the Titanic, capturing the world's imagination with haunting images of the lost liner. Now, in June 1989, he turned his attention to the Atlantic's other famous wreck. Supported by funding from European television networks, eager for another underwater spectacular, Ballard brought the same technology that found the Titanic. The research vessel Stella towed Argo, a deep-sea camera platform, back and forth across the search area, while sonar mapped the bottom. The search zone, based on survivor reports and British navigational records, covered dozens of square miles of mountainous underwater terrain. Finding a ship, even one as large as the Bismarck, was like searching for a specific building in a blacked-out city. On June 8, 1989, the cameras found her. She sat upright on a slope at 15,700 feet, remarkably intact for a ship that supposedly suffered catastrophic damage. Her hull was whole. Her main turrets, though displaced, were present. Most striking, there were no massive holes where British shells should have penetrated below the waterline. Ballard's team documented the wreck over several days, their cameras revealing a ship that looked far more intact than expected. The discovery made international headlines, but Ballard's expedition had limitations. His equipment could film the exterior and take measurements, but could not enter the wreck or examine it in detail. He noted the lack of major hull damage below the armor belt and suggested, based on his observations, that scuttling charges had indeed sunk the ship, not British torpedoes. British veterans of the battle disputed this. Arguments erupted in naval journals and documentaries, but nobody could prove anything conclusively because nobody could see inside the ship, into the spaces where the final drama played out, into the Admiral Suite, where Lutyens made his last decision. That would require another decade of technological advancement and an expedition specifically designed to penetrate the wreck's interior spaces, something Ballard's team was not equipped to attempt. Deeper investigation. James Cameron's 22nd expedition in 2002 brought more sophisticated equipment and a specific focus on the damage question. Cameron, fresh from filming Titanic and a serious deep-sea technology enthusiast, deployed remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, that could maneuver inside the wreck. His team spent weeks documenting damage patterns, analyzing what British shells had actually accomplished and what the Germans might have done themselves. Cameron's conclusion, detailed in his documentary, supported the scuttling theory. He found explosive damage consistent with internal charges on the armored deck and evidence of open seacocks, but even Cameron's ROVs could not reach everywhere. The Admiral Suite, Lutyens' command center, remained off-limits. The corridors leading to it were too twisted, too blocked with debris, and too dangerous for the existing technology to navigate. Other expeditions followed. In 2001, deep ocean expeditions brought paying tourists to view the wreck through portholes in MR submersibles. In 2016, Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen's yacht, equipped with state-of-the-art ROVs, conducted another survey. Each expedition added details, but the core mystery remained. What happened in the Admiral Suite during those final hours? What orders did Lutyens give? What communications did he receive? The answers existed somewhere in that flooded tomb, but remained tantalizingly out of reach. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. In 2018, a private research foundation led by marine archaeologist David Mers secured permits for a comprehensive survey using next-generation ROV technology specifically designed for wreck penetration. Mers had found dozens of deep wrecks, including the Australian hospital ship Centaur and the cruiser Perth. He understood warships, understood German design, and, most importantly, understood that getting inside the Admiral Suite required patience, planning, and equipment custom-built for the task. The expedition launched in April 1919. It took 3 weeks of careful work, clearing debris, mapping passages, and inching the ROV through twisted metal before they finally reached the sealed door to the Admiral Suite. What happened next would change the historical record forever. Inside the Admiral Suite. The Admiral Suite was not a single space. It was a complex of interconnected spaces. Lutyens' sea cabin, his chart room, his office, and his personal quarters, all designed to let him command the ship from a central location while maintaining access to the bridge above. When the Bismarck sank, the suite apparently sealed itself, whether by design or chance, creating a pocket that prevented total flooding long enough that items inside had sunk in relatively calm water rather than being blasted apart by explosive decompression.
The ROV cameras pushed through the outer door into what had been the chart room. The scene was frozen in time, almost peaceful. Charts still lay on the plotting table, held down by brass weights. A parallel ruler sat where someone had last used it. Most striking, the compressed air and cold had preserved paper. Documents that should have disintegrated decades ago remained legible when the high-definition cameras zoomed in. What they saw contradicted the accepted timeline. The charts showed the Bismarck's track, marked hour by hour, but the final positions, marked in what was clearly Luchen's handwriting based on comparisons with authenticated documents, did not match the German naval staff's official records. The discrepancy was a small but significant. Luchen's had deliberately misreporting his position in his final transmissions. Not by much, but enough to matter. The ROV moved deeper. In Luchen's personal office, filing cabinets had spilled open as the ship sank. Document cases lay scattered. The team spent hours filming every visible page, every scrap of preserved paper. Among them were signal logs, records of every radio message sent and received. These were the jackpot. These were the documents that would prove the cover-up. What the signals showed was explosive. In the final 12 hours before the Bismarck sank, Luchen's received 3 separate messages from Naval Group Command West, the headquarters coordinating the operation from Paris. The first, received at 11 p.m. on May 26th, was routine, acknowledging the rudder damage and promising U-boat assistance. The second, at 2 a.m. on May 27th, was anything but routine. It ordered Luchen's.
The phrasing was unusually emphatic, suggesting desperation from the high command, but here is what made it explosive. Luchen's response, found in his personal log, which had been sealed in a metal case, expressed confusion about the urgency. He noted that while capture was possible, it was by no means certain. The ship could still fight, still potentially break away if fortune favored them. His notation suggested he suspected the high command knew something about the ship's design or capabilities that they did not want the British to discover. And there, in the margin of that final log entry in Luchen's handwriting, were the words that proved the cover-up. They know something I don't know. The cover-up revealed. The Bismarck carried a secret, and both sides knew it. The ship's construction had included experimental fire control systems that integrated radar and optical range-finding in ways no other navy had yet achieved. More than that, the ship incorporated new metallurgical techniques in her armor that the Germans believed gave them a critical advantage. These were not just military secrets, they represented years of research that Germany could not afford to hand the British intact. The German cover-up was straightforward. Naval Group Command ordered the Bismarck scuttled, not because capture was imminent, but because they could not risk the British gaining access to her intact systems. Survivor testimonies about scuttling charges in open sea were absolutely true. What Germany never admitted was that those orders came hours before the final battle, that Luchen's was instructed to fight until crippled and then scuttle, rather than try every possible maneuver to escape. The official version, that the crew made the decision themselves in the final moments, protected the image of German ingenuity, while hiding the fact that High Command had written off the ship and crew to protect technical secrets. The British cover-up was more subtle but equally significant. Post-battle analysis showed that British shells and torpedoes, while devastating to the Bismarck's superstructure and weapons, had not penetrated her main armor belt in any significant way. The hull damage that sank the ship came from internal explosions and flooding through deliberately opened seacocks. The Royal Navy could not admit this publicly because they had just lost the hood to a single hit and needed to show their remaining battleships could still destroy Germany's best. So official reports emphasized the number of shells fired and claimed penetrating hits that physical evidence did not support. Both navies had veteran survivors and officers who knew the truth, but speaking up meant admitting uncomfortable facts. For the Germans, it meant acknowledging their command had sacrificed the Bismarck's crew to protect technology. For the British, it meant admitting their battleships might not be as effective as public morale required people to believe. So both sides maintained their versions, knowing they contradicted each other, knowing the full truth was probably somewhere in between, but neither willing to admit what actually happened. The documents from the Admiral Suite proved all of this. Signal logs showed the German orders. Damage reports in Luchen's files compiled by damage control teams during the battle showed exactly which British hits penetrated and which did not. Most damningly, a sealed letter from Luchen's to his wife, never sent and never recovered until now, laid out his growing suspicion that Naval Command was more concerned with protecting secrets than saving his ship. That letter was heartbreaking. Luchen's knew he was probably going to die. He understood the tactical situation, but he also understood in those final hours that his superiors had made the decision for him. The letter explained the technical features of the ship that High Command was desperate to protect, features that post-war records claimed did not exist or were not significant. He wrote about his duty to follow orders, even when those orders meant certain death. He wrote about his hope that someday, when the war was over, the truth would emerge and people would understand the choices forced upon him. That letter, photographed by ROV cameras in April 2019, proved that the official narrative was a carefully constructed fabrication agreed upon by both sides for their own purposes, regardless of the historical truth. Why it matters. Today, 84 years after the Bismarck sank, the truth finally surfaced from 15,000 feet of darkness. The revelation does not change who won the battle. The British still destroyed Germany's most powerful battleship. The Hood was still avenged. The Bismarck still rests on the ocean floor, a grave for over 2,000 men who deserved better than to become pawns in a propaganda war that outlasted their lives by 8 decades. But what emerged from the Admiral Suite changes everything about how we understand that moment in history and how nations shape the stories they want us to believe. The Bismarck was not simply sunk in battle, and she was not purely scuttled by her crew in a final act of defiance. The reality was messier, more complicated, and far less heroic than either side wanted to admit. She was sacrificed by her own command to protect technical secrets that they valued more than the lives aboard her, then finished off by British guns that were less effective than their Navy claimed, but still devastating enough to complete the job. Both sides lied. Both sides had logical reasons for lying, and both sides maintained those lies for decades because admitting the truth served neither nation's interest during the war or in the decades that followed. Think about what that means. Every historical account written before 2019, every documentary, every textbook, every museum display was based on deliberately falsified records. Historians writing in good faith repeated information that both Germany and Britain knew was incomplete at best and fabricated at worst. Veterans who knew pieces of the truth stayed silent, bound by loyalty, by classification, by the simple fact that contradicting official records would make them look like liars or fools. Some of them took their knowledge to the grave. Others spoke carefully in interviews decades later, choosing their words with a precision that should have raised more questions than it did. Many remained silent for reasons we can now better understand. The deep-sea cameras that finally penetrated the Admiral Suite did more than solve a historical mystery. They demonstrated something far more important about how history itself works. Official records are not necessarily true just because they are official. Governments do not always tell the truth, even to their own historians, even decades after the events in question. Classified documents stay classified for reasons that go beyond simple security concerns. Sometimes they stay classified because they are embarrassing, because they contradict comfortable narratives, because the truth serves nobody's political purposes.
Naval warfare changed forever after World War II. Aircraft carriers replaced battleships as the dominant force at sea. The kind of ship-to-ship gunnery duels that sank the Bismarck became obsolete almost immediately. But the lessons about technological secrecy, about protecting advanced systems, even at the cost of lives, those lessons remained relevant. How many other incidents during the Cold War involved similar calculations? How many ships, submarines, and aircraft were lost with their crews while protecting secrets that nations valued more than the people serving them? We will probably never know the full answer to that question, but the Bismarck proved it happened at least once, and probably more often than we would like to believe. It proves that the official story, the one told in schools and repeated in documentaries, can be fundamentally wrong for generations without anyone in power feeling compelled to correct the record. And sometimes the ocean preserves what nations try to bury. The cold, the pressure, the darkness that kept the Bismarck hidden for half a century also protected the evidence that would eventually expose the cover-up. Luchen's final letter, the signal logs, the damage reports, all survived because they sank beyond human reach until technology caught up with history's secrets. The same deep-sea exploration technology that found the Titanic, that mapped underwater mountain ranges, that discovered new species in the abyss, also became the tool that finally forced the truth into the light. The Bismarck's final secret wasn't about tactics or technology. It was about truth. There were always two stories, the one they told us and the one that Günter Luchens carried with him into the depths on May 27, 1941. For 8 decades, the official version stood unchallenged, carved into monuments and printed in books. Now, finally, his version has returned to light, preserved in documents that survived against all odds in a flooded tomb 3 miles down, proving that sometimes the dead speak louder than the living ever dared. And sometimes, if we are patient enough, if technology advances far enough, the ocean gives up its secrets and forces us to confront the lies we have been telling ourselves for generations.